Hello, amazing committee. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and follow along with this precursor chat to the comprehensive exam prep that I have going on. I think we all would love to be in the same room. I know I'm more of a back and forth sort of person and conversationalist in that manner, maybe too much of a conversationalist, but I nonetheless appreciate the time restraint of us doing it in this format. I was asked about that this week, and with my wife being due on May 2nd, hoping to finish the comprehensive exam element of this process prior to that. Fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. But those of you that have had me in class know that I can't say no to a corny presentation style. So I was really thinking about what I was studying, which, we'll get into it a bit, of course, which surrounds, which is surrounded around students being able to have a positive trajectory in their academic experience and ultimately their careers. So I thought about setting the table and really appreciating the opportunity to grow, to have mentorship, to have community, and to be more holistic in the process of the college experience. So, with that sort of cheesy metaphor in the background, I wanted to break down our conversation today, um, which is around themes of advising, career design, post-college life, and not just the job, and I would say the career, but also the holistic side of a sense of accomplishment, a sense of happiness, a sense of success, and that being defined by each student. Um, but when that student starts that journey in high school, or it can be post high school, we have a lot of non-traditional students out there, but we all get asked, have been asked that same question. What do you want to be when you grow up? That cliche question that comes up, whether you're a child, an adolescent, or even, there are retired folks out there that are still changing what their day-to-day looks like, right? So that answer is regularly revised, it's recycled, it's repeated, and even try to focusing in on what I want to study, but thinking about the college student getting the question, whether it's from family members, coaches, neighbors, mentors, whoever, and even asking themselves, what do you want to do for a living? Why? Does it make good money? Are you even going to college? College is so expensive, so you better make the right decision. Even some of the example questions here, I'm a nurse, your grandmother was a nurse, you're going to be a nurse. Those family pressures and how that varies from culture to culture, household to household. But the inquiries, the assertions, the sometimes solicited, sometimes unsolicited opinions can kind of seem endless. So coupling that with the reality of those external pressures also hitting the internal ones when you can have imposter syndrome, self-doubt, becoming anxious with all the options available or not feeling like there's enough options when, plan A doesn't work. Going back to the nursing example in my current role at Rick, we have a lot of students that apply to the nursing program that fall short because it's really competitive, or students that come in as an intended nursing student, for example, and don't even get the opportunity to apply because you have to have certain grades in certain classes to apply. And they're sitting in this limbo land of quote unquote being an intended major without making progression towards a degree, which has a lot of concerning elements attached to that. So, how do we figure this out when we sit in these communities and our everyday lives? Um, we're talking about career paths, and for me, one of the themes that comes up a lot is also that liberal arts degrees don't amount to successful or sustainable career paths anymore. What are you going to do with a psych degree? What are you going to do with a poli sci degree? What are you going to do with a biology degree? Versus what I call linear degrees, accounting. People can really visualize if you're getting a degree in accounting, you want to be an accountant, or education, you want to be a teacher. If you're engineering, an engineer. Those aren't always true, of course, but they are more quote unquote practical in society, and society can see the end results of that. And what I really want to show is that there are other paths that get there from a skill based perspective. Um, So, ultimately families are distancing themselves right now, not to get into where politics and media and the world are, but there's this distrust in education and an institutionalized education and misinformation really around that. And you're seeing an uptick in homeschooling or unique private schools, even trade schools, and the college degree is, specifically the liberal arts degree really is facing a lot more pressure, not just in society, but even from our administration. When programs are cut, they're looking at graduation rates, how many students graduate with this degree, what are alumni doing? You're not seeing, nursing getting cut at schools a lot, or, cybersecurity or engineering. You're seeing some of those more intimate, small, uh, most of the time liberal arts programs getting cut. And they're getting a little bit of a bad reputation because of what's going on in the world with media and politics, which is a whole nother dissertation in itself. But kind of coming back to the goal of this conversation, I intend to study if a centralized advising model impacts postgraduate career placement and happiness, and coding for that and defining what happiness can look like and success matters. Um, so really seeing if that centralized advising model impacts postgraduate career placement and specifically looking at liberal arts programs. So some questions that I have are um, how students are defining the success, happiness, and does the centralized model have a positive impact on liberal arts specifically as they're navigating post-college pursuits and trying to establish a foundation for future goals. So when I hit pause, I think about some experiences like at open house. So I'm sure you've all have experienced an open house, but if you haven't, you're seeing a wave of students and families come in through the door and considering your institution. And I can sit at my advising table and I think about the extremes. I've had a student come in, both parents, maybe an older sibling, and they have 35 AP credits coming in, maybe more. They want to double major in psychology and computer science, and they're asking, is this possible? Can I graduate with this in 30 years? Do I need summer? What are some career or internship locations? What are some of your alumni doing? One of the parents asks the question, the sibling asks the question, there's connection, there's mentorship, sometimes some pressure, but this student is embodying someone who's done some research, that's had access to information, that has started to cultivate a plan and is looking for confirmations rather than asking questions. And then right after that student walks away from the table, there's another student coming in on their own, looking a little lost. I have to approach them and say, hey, are you looking for a certain resource? And making some small talk before I realize they're not sure how to navigate an open house setting. They haven't been coached on it or they can't recall it. And I'm introducing what advising is and how we can support you and how we connect you to other places. And I'm taking it upon myself to walk that student to other spaces that make sense for them. And the students, oh, yeah, I'm thinking about nursing because my mom's a nurse and I know it's a good job, and so that's why I'm here. And then I'll ask, well, why nursing specifically? And they're not sure. So a lot of the times it's, especially because these are, if we're looking at traditional student high school students, they might not be as well informed on what their options are, what the career layouts could lead to. And maybe they have one mentor or a handful, and they're just getting the information from the same source. They're not diversifying information. Their exposure just looks different than that first student. So to me, this is a problem because students don't have equitable access to information, especially first gen students. Some students are selecting majors around even excuse me, some students are picking majors and selecting majors while still having that lack of information and trying to cultivate that. Some students are falling into majors or selecting majors that really aren't good matches. And especially with those nonlinear degree plans like the ologies of the world, psychology, sociology, um, graduating without a plan can be problematic. You have some debt. There are certain career paths, like for myself, for example, if I wanted to work in higher ed, for the most part, I knew I had to get a master's degree. And without said master's degree, my opportunity to earn a higher income or have career trajectory was going to be really, really challenging. And without that information as an undergraduate student, could I have planned that out for myself? Probably not, or very unlikely to. So ultimately, how can we help students make plans with their programs well before graduation, build that credibility and trust so students can start using those resources and really trying to foster and cultivate that plan? And how do we do that early on in the process? Because if we wait till junior, senior year, it's not super helpful. So to me, a problem to simplify is access to information to make sustainable long-term decisions in a career outcomes manner. A couple quotes that I love from Troset and Ballison, if I'm pronouncing Ballison correctly. Sorry, but they won't know, I guess. Students aren't going to college for intrinsic knowledge. It's too costly. College is viewed as a necessary step for social and career mobility. Students and parents share an increasing expectation that higher education will directly prepare undergraduates for the world of employment. And that's just not as true as it used to be, right? So I think showing showing families that the diploma attainment itself isn't enough in every job market and every career trajectory. It really is the skills and opportunities and co-curriculars that help enhance those things that are going to be pivotal. Um, and asking those questions of what do families want, because the audience here really matters. What do students want? What do institutions want? And what does society need? And you could filter want to need for some of these. Thinking about institutions want to say that they're graduating students at a high rate, that retention is strong, that students are making X amount on average or getting into X amount of grad programs. They want to sell happiness, success, security. They want families to feel good about sending their students to college X. They want employers to feel like they can recruit at college X, and they want students to apply to college X so that they feel like they're making a wise decision in their future. That is very similar to what families look for. Students, that ranges, right? But ultimately, students want to be able to have a sustainable future where they can pay their bills, have a sense of purpose, feel good about themselves, have a career they're happy with. I think that's another thing we could probably spend our whole dissertation or side conversation on is, you know, the notion of I want a job that I'm going to be super happy with. I think that is a really simplistic statement that has complex conversations around it, and hoping to dive into that a little bit. And then ultimately, we may want these things, but what does society need? There's careers out there 20 years from now that probably don't exist in this today in 2025. So how do we prepare students to be equipped with the skills to be adaptable, to be flexible, to seek career readiness, and to have value in an ever-changing world? So thinking about how I'd like to design this, I think there's a lot of, like anything else, minutia and nuance. But I am thinking about a case study approach and a narrative inquiry approach, because being able to focus on multiple points of emphasis for students, being able to collect data through conversation, through experiences, through lived experiences, that's going to look different for every student. And I think, being able to pull that information and then ultimately code it later on is really important. And I think having students being able to have regular reflection points matters as well. In this proposal, I'm hoping to have centralized advising models as a centric point of information sharing and accessibility for the first gen student seeking liberal arts education and really education in general. So for me, being able to have a dynamic way to have regular reflection points. If we ask a graduating senior, what occurred in your first year in college that helped you make a decision around your major or your career path, et cetera, they might not be able to harken back to that experience in a way that is meaningful. They might, yes, have like a core memory or a moment, this professor in class or a friend of mine in the residence halls, or I had this conversation in the dining hall. That may happen, but I'm really looking for the multifaceted, you know, multiple things that can occur, small conversations, big ones, planned ones through first year experiences. So for me, having multiple points of information gathering from interviews, focus groups, surveys throughout their college experience, I think will be really important when trying to see if there's some impact with centralized advising models trying to get this information. And then contextually thinking about advising, there's a plenty of different advising theories and approaches that go into advising approaches and advising meetings. So prescriptive is what it sounds like. It's here are the courses you need, here's how you register, make sure it's on this date. It is very much the advisor giving information, the student asking transactional questions, and that's important for me in my personal advising approach and mantra. This is embedded throughout the experience for advising. It's not the, and maybe it's the first carrot that gets certain students in the door, but that is not the main aspect of it. It is embedding prescriptive advising in the other three approaches. So appreciative advising is really layered. There's 6 different kind of stages, and you can kind of bounce around them and kind of be cyclical and reassess with them. But essentially, you're disarming so that the student feels comfortable and being open with you. You're discovering what they are interested in. You're finding out information. You're learning about their background, their goals, etc. You're ultimately dreaming with them. So how, if you couldn't fail, what would you be doing? What has been your favorite part about your college experience? You're really trying to kind of develop and move into the design phase, which is kind of creating what they're looking to do. So if your career path, if you're hoping for your career path to be Y, how do we get to Y? If you are trying to get to grad school, how do we get there? If you're trying to be a veterinarian, how do we get there? If you're not sure, how do we start the process? And then delivering. If you say you're going to do something with a student, to do it, to collaborate, to connect them to resources, and to have that follow through. And then also to not to settle. So by not settling, it's not, you know, you have the opportunity to reassess and to pivot, but it's not saying, well, you know what, my math scores aren't high enough. I could ever do computer science. Well, let's explore that a little bit. How do we get support if you feel like math is going to be a barrier, and not to give up on something before you even start? Intrusive and proactive is basically a case manager approach where you are monitoring the students' grades, you are being active with their records, you're reaching out at different points of the year, even if they are doing really well. So this isn't, I think, one of the perceptions on intrusive or proactive advising. It feels like it's sometimes described with leadership as monitoring your students that aren't doing well, that need extra help. Yes, that's a part of it, but you're also that honor student that's got a 3.9 and has a plan. They might not feel like they are making friends on campus, so they might not feel super connected to the institution. So by you reaching out, by you checking in, even if it's to say, hey, it looks like your schedule is great, your midterm grades were great, I checked your grades at the end of the semester, all those different types of interactions, it's building some community with the student and hoping to have your conversations go beyond the prescriptive ones. And then developmental, which essentially is working with a student to meet them where they're at and to push them to that next stage of, self-discovery or making decisions or some self-efficacy, but being able to kind of work with that student beyond just, course registration, and help them explore different career paths and figure out their strengths and navigate that. So all this, the themes of centralized advising models, first gen students, liberal arts career outcomes. I'm thinking about at this point in my conversations of pursuing a 3-paper dissertation. So the first one is around centralized advising models and their impact on sense of belonging and community. First gen will probably be in there a bit. The second is liberal arts career paths and career outcomes around happiness and success. And the third we haven't gotten into much in this is 21st century management in higher education. So to kind of talk about that a little bit in my role as an assistant dean and being a director prior to that for quite a bit, the reality of what management looks like. Not, I can't assume for other industries, but I would imagine outside of higher ed as well. But for me, it's not just setting up someone on my team for successful advising experience with their students and how to navigate the institution and resources. And yes, that's what we're doing. And to be honest with you, the advising experience with a student has a lot of transferable skills to support staff in that role. But you know, some of my staff members are struggling with some of the executive orders that are taking place. Their identity is under attack. And yes, I don't have to be everything for everybody, but I need to hold a space and have some level of comfort in that conversation with someone that I'm supervising. That is something that I've experienced that a lot of my team and other folks on campus look for from their supervisor. Just last month, I had someone really break down in my office around their marriage during our one-on-one where we are supposed to do a year-end review. It really pivoted to their personal life. And, there's conversations around boundaries and all that stuff. But there is a reality of, and especially in the service fields, to, yes, have boundaries, but also be able to hold space for what that looks like and what those expectations look like in the higher ed setting. So to kind of culminate the theme of some of the images and what I was alluding to setting the table, my goal and this is, working with students, we try to set the table for them to set that experience and show them by modeling. And the goal that I have is throughout my research to help students go from witnessing how a table is set, learning, to then doing it with me or their mentor or their team, their people, their community, and then ultimately paying it forward and having that be a cyclical thing. So the goal in what I want to study is helping students set the table over time for themselves, their communities, their people, and really pay attention to that career trajectory within higher ed. Happy to answer any other follow-up questions. Well, I guess that's what comps can be for. But if there's anything else that folks on the committee need from me, I'm more than happy to supply it as quickly as I possibly can. I hope this expedited presentation was helpful with forming your questions. Again, a massive thank you to volunteering, to all of you for volunteering to be on my committee, and I look forward to our continued work together. Thank you.